My name is Edward Lawson. Most people called me Ed. I turned 59 this past spring, though in my mind I still carried the discipline of the man I'd been at 35 when my career first began to take shape. For 25 years, I served as head of risk management at Hudson National Bank in New York City. It was a position that demanded calm, foresight, and a cold kind of patience. In Wall Street circles, they nicknamed me the Quiet Guardian. I wasn't the type to take reckless bets or gamble with other people's fortunes. My role was to calculate, anticipate disaster, and prevent it before anyone else even noticed. That was my gift. Quiet numbers, silent victories. Yet for all those years, the numbers were never my real passion. My true reason for getting up every morning was my family. Karen, my wife of 35 years, had been my college sweetheart. Together we raised 2 children, Daniel, now 32, and Sophie, 28. Every choice I made, every bonus I earned, every late night I endured at the bank, was justified in my mind by them. When Daniel wanted Columbia Business School, the $65,000 tuition was a check I wrote without a second thought. When Sophie dreamed of opening her design studio in Brooklyn, I transferred $120,000 to her account, proud that I could be the wind beneath her wings. For Karen, I provided everything she ever wanted: weekends in the Hamptons, a new BMW every few years, our penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. I wasn't flashy myself. My suits were always conservative, my watch understated, my voice calm. But for them, nothing was too extravagant. As retirement drew near, colleagues congratulated me. "You've made it, Ed. Time to enjoy life now." They thought I'd earned the right to relax, to finally let go of the endless spreadsheets and risk models. I smiled politely, but in truth, I was uneasy. Not about work. About home. Karen had become distant in the months leading up to my farewell. Late-night calls she ended quickly when I entered the room. A new coldness in her eyes when she looked at me. Daniel and Sophie, too, had changed. Our conversations, once casual and warm, now circled around inheritance, trusts, and what happens when you're gone. At first, I dismissed it as natural curiosity, but the frequency, and the tone, gnawed at me. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. I had always been the silent guardian, hadn't I? Surely, my family would never treat me as just a balance sheet. The night of my retirement dinner was supposed to be a celebration. I had rented a rooftop terrace overlooking the Hudson, invited a small circle of friends, and asked only for laughter, music, and memories. The city lights shimmered on the water as the evening breeze swept through. I raised my glass, prepared to thank everyone, when Karen stepped forward with a manila envelope in her hands. Her smile was polite but stiff, as though rehearsed. "Ed," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter, "I have a gift for you." I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. For a moment, the lights blurred. I read the words: irreconcilable differences, division of assets, alimony. My hand tightened on the paper. I lifted my eyes to her. She leaned close, her whisper colder than the river wind. "I don't want to spend my life with an aging retiree. You understand, don't you?" Behind her stood Daniel and Sophie. Their faces weren't shocked. They weren't even ashamed. Daniel gave a half-shrug. "Dad, you have to see it from our perspective. Mom deserves to be happy. And, well, we need to think about the future too." Sophie crossed her arms, nodding. "Your investments, the condo, all of it, it's a lot to manage. Maybe it's better if you let us handle things." Something hollow opened in my chest. The betrayal wasn't Karen's alone. My children, my blood, were complicit. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them into my jacket pocket. My voice, steady as ever, betrayed nothing of the storm inside. "All right. I'll sign." The party carried on. Glasses clinked. Music played. But I was no longer present. My eyes tracked Karen as she laughed too loudly with a man I didn't recognize, tall, smug, standing by the edge of the terrace. I noticed how Daniel and Sophie exchanged glances with him, as though they shared some unspoken alliance. I said nothing. I smiled when expected. But inside, the quiet guardian took over. Years of analyzing crises, of staying calm while others panicked, had trained me well. I saw the truth with the clarity of a balance sheet. They thought I was finished. That at 59, I was little more than an old man with assets to divide and a life to discard. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to learn, was that I had spent the last decade preparing for risks far greater than market crashes. Quietly, cautiously, I had built investments they knew nothing about: offshore accounts, shell companies, private equity stakes. My real fortune was invisible to them, protected by the same foresight that had defined my career. That night, while they celebrated their supposed victory, I sat alone on the rooftop's edge, looking out over the Hudson. The water was black, rippling under the city's glare. I thought about the irony. All my life I had been the guardian of others, and in the end, no one had guarded me. But betrayal has a peculiar effect. For some, it breaks the spirit. For others, it sharpens it into something unrecognizable. As I watched Karen's laughter with a stranger, as I heard my children plotting my future like accountants dividing an estate, I felt something inside me shift. The quiet guardian had been betrayed. Now, he would become something else. The next morning, I signed the divorce papers. 3 days later, I disappeared. 3 days after I signed the papers, I vanished. To Karen, Daniel, and Sophie, it must have looked like I had accepted defeat, an old man slipping quietly out of the way so they could feast on the remains of what I'd built. They received the condo, half the accounts, and the trust allocations I had set up long ago. They believed they had stripped me bare. But they never saw the invisible ledger I carried in my head. They never understood that for 25 years I had been paid to anticipate catastrophe, to prepare for the unthinkable. A man like me does not retire without contingencies. I packed 2 suitcases. One held clothing, the other, a laptop, 3 encrypted hard drives, and a stack of documents that no one but me knew existed. I left my penthouse keys on the counter, walked out into the dawn haze of Manhattan, and didn't look back. By nightfall, I was in Vermont. I had purchased a 15-acre property there years before, through a shell company registered in Delaware. To the world, it belonged to Maple Hollow Investments, LLC. In truth, it was my sanctuary, a log cabin on the edge of the Green Mountains, surrounded by pine, the kind of place where cell service faltered and neighbors minded their own business. The first morning, I woke to silence. No sirens, no city horns, no Karen's clipped voice reminding me of errands. Just wind moving through the trees and the distant call of a hawk. For the first time in decades, I felt unseen, untraceable. But peace was not my aim. Reinvention was. I built a command center inside that cabin. 3 monitors on a heavy oak desk. Satellite internet beaming from a dish I installed myself. Files spread across the table. Charts, reports, market analyses. Every morning at 5 a.m., I sat down in front of those screens, just as I once had in a glass tower overlooking Wall Street, and I went to work. My targets were different now. No longer Fortune 500 portfolios or institutional risks. Now, I invested in what the world dismissed as too risky or too small. Renewable energy startups in Maine. A fintech app out of Toronto. Agricultural tech in South America. While Karen sipped wine with her new lover and Daniel bragged about crypto schemes, I quietly tripled my hidden capital. But numbers were only part of my transformation. I looked in the mirror one morning and saw the toll of years spent chained to a desk, a soft belly, slumped shoulders, eyes dulled by fluorescent lights. That version of me would not survive the road ahead. So, I trained. At first, I could barely manage a 2-mile hike up the slope behind the cabin. My lungs burned. My knees protested. But each day I returned, adding a little more distance, a little more weight to the pack on my back. By autumn, I was sprinting through trails slick with pine needles, heart hammering like a war drum. I bought free weights, a punching bag, resistance bands. The cabin shook with the sound of fists striking leather. At 60, I was stronger, leaner, and more alive than I had been at 45. The quiet guardian was gone. In his place stood something harder, sharper. Still, life has a way of surprising even the most calculated man. Her name was Anna. I met her on a rainy morning in town. She owned a small vineyard just outside Brattleboro, 51 years old, divorced, her hands stained purple from grape skins. I had gone into her shop for a bottle of wine, nothing more. But the way she spoke, warm, unhurried, with eyes that seemed to notice more than they admitted, disarmed me. Over time, I returned. First once a week, then twice. We shared coffee, then dinners. Her laughter was unpolished, genuine. She didn't know me as the bank executive or the discarded husband. To her, I was just Ed, the man who liked her Cabernet and asked too many questions about soil acidity. 6 months later, I realized I was smiling again. 18 months after we met, we were married in a ceremony among the vines. Just the two of us, a justice of the peace, and a horizon painted gold with sunset. 2 years after that, we adopted Max, a 9-year-old boy who had been abandoned by parents more interested in their addictions than their child. Max was thin, wary, but in time, he grew into laughter and trust. He called me Dad. For the first time, I felt the word meant something. While Karen and my children chased wealth and validation, I built something quieter, stronger. A life not of extravagance but of loyalty and love. Then, 4 years after I had vanished, the past came knocking. It was my lawyer, Charles, who called. His voice was grave, though I could hear a strange note of satisfaction beneath it. "Ed," he said, "I thought you should know. Karen, she's lost everything. That man she left you for wasn't who he claimed. He bled her dry. Daniel too. He invested almost $500,000 into a crypto venture that collapsed. Sophie's studio went under. She owes more than $150,000. For a moment, I was silent. The fireplace crackled in front of me. Max's laughter echoed from the next room, where Anna was helping him with homework. "Do they want something from me?" I asked. "Yes," Charles replied. "They want your help." I leaned back, eyes on the flames. 4 years ago, their betrayal had hollowed me. Now, it only confirmed what I had always known. Loyalty is rarer than gold, and family is not defined by blood. "Tell them," I said slowly, "that the man they betrayed no longer exists." That night, I wrote a letter. Just 1 page. Precise. A surgeon's cut. The man you discarded is gone. In his place stands someone who knows the value of loyalty. Family is not given, it is earned. And you, each of you, chose otherwise. I enclosed a photo of myself with Anna and Max, standing before our vineyard estate. 50 acres of rolling green hills, sunlight spilling over the vines, 3 smiles bound by something stronger than blood. I mailed it without a return address. And then I closed the door on the past. The first ripple of their downfall came not from Karen, but from Daniel. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. Vermont's air was crisp with the bite of winter's approach, and I was pruning vines with Anna when my phone buzzed. It was Charles, my lawyer again. "Ed," he said without preamble, "your son has made the papers." I wiped my hands on my jacket and leaned against the fence. "What sort of papers?" "Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, even some of the tabloids." He paused, savoring the irony. "The crypto exchange Daniel invested in, it collapsed. Fraud, money laundering, embezzlement. It's a scandal, Ed. Hundreds of investors swindled. Your son poured $400,000 into it. Gone overnight." I looked out across the rows of vines. Daniel had always been arrogant with money. He saw it not as something to guard, but as a tool to buy respect. I had tried to teach him discipline, the patience of compounding, the quiet art of letting wealth grow unseen. But he was intoxicated by flash, fast gains, fast cars, fast friends. "What happens to him now?" I asked. Charles gave a dry laugh. "He'll be sued. He'll be investigated. And when the dust clears, he'll be broke." That night, after Max was asleep, Anna poured me a glass of her best Merlot. We sat by the fire, its glow softening the lines of her face. "Do you feel sorry for him?" she asked gently. I swirled the wine, watching its legs crawl down the glass. "Pity, maybe, but not regret. He made his choices. He turned his back on me long before the money vanished." Anna reached across, her hand warm over mine. "And you? Do you feel vindicated?" I met her gaze. "I feel nothing. That's the point." But that wasn't entirely true. Deep inside, a quiet satisfaction stirred, the same calm clarity I had felt every time I outmaneuvered a financial disaster in my old life. Except now, the disaster wasn't numbers on a screen. It was flesh and blood, and it had chosen its own path. 2 months later, Sophie followed her brother into ruin. Her design studio, once a bright, airy space in Brooklyn with glossy white walls and sharp steel fixtures, closed under mounting debt. I read the headline in a local business journal, "Up-and-coming designer files for bankruptcy after failed expansion." The article detailed unpaid creditors, an eviction notice, and loans totaling more than $150,000. There was even a photograph, Sophie leaving the courthouse, hair disheveled, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, lips pressed in a thin line. I remembered writing that first check to her years ago, $120,000, proud to help her chase her dream. I remembered her hugging me, whispering, "Thank you, Dad. You always believe in me." And then I remembered her standing behind Karen on that rooftop, nodding as she suggested they manage my estate. Belief, like money, is a currency. And once spent, it is not returned. Karen's fall came last, and it was the most brutal of all. The man she had left me for, a supposed real estate developer with slick charm and expensive suits, was unmasked as a con artist. He drained her accounts, sold off her jewelry, and vanished to God knows where. She was left with nothing but debt and the small rental in Queens that she now shared with Sophie. Daniel, too proud to admit he was broke, couch-surfed with friends, his once-polished suits worn at the elbows. Charles called again, almost relishing the updates. "They're circling the drain, Ed. And now, finally, they're reaching out. They want to meet. They're asking if you'll forgive, if you'll help." I considered this in silence. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft flakes settling over the vineyard like ash after a fire. Max was building a snowman by the porch, his laughter carrying through the cold air. Anna stood beside him, scarf wrapped around her neck, cheeks flushed pink. "Tell them I'll think about it," I said at last. The meeting happened in January. I chose the location carefully, a modest cafe in Midtown Manhattan. Neutral ground. Public enough that they couldn't make a scene. When I walked in, I saw them instantly. Karen, hair thinner, face lined with stress. Sophie, shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. Daniel, his arrogance crumbled into something brittle, a man pretending at dignity but failing. They looked at me as if I were a lifeline. "Ed," Karen began, her voice trembling, "we made mistakes. We see that now. But you've always been steady. You've always been the one who kept us together. Please help us." Daniel leaned forward. "Dad, I screwed up. I thought I knew better. I didn't. I need guidance. Just a little support to get back on my feet." Sophie's lip quivered. "I can't keep doing this. Please, Dad." I sat back, watching them. 4 years, I had given everything: money, love, loyalty, without hesitation. And when they turned on me, they hadn't looked back. Now, the tables had turned. "Family," I said softly, "is not blood. It is loyalty. And loyalty is something you chose to trade for greed." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Ed, please. I was wrong. We were all wrong." I stood, slid a plain white envelope across the table. "Here's my answer." They reached for it with desperate hands. Inside was the letter I had written months before. And the photo, me, Anna, and Max, smiling in front of our vineyard estate, 50 acres of life rebuilt. Karen's hand trembled as she looked at it. Sophie's face crumpled. Daniel cursed under his breath. Without another word, I walked out into the winter air. The city roared around me, but inside, I felt only silence. Clean, cold silence. That night, back in Vermont, I sat with Anna by the fire, Max asleep upstairs. She asked no questions, but when I took her hand, she squeezed it gently, as if she already knew. The past had come begging, and I had closed the door. Spring arrived in Vermont with a gentleness that felt almost undeserved. The vineyard was waking again, green shoots breaking through the earth, a quiet promise of renewal. I spent my mornings walking the rows, pruning and tying, breathing the clean mountain air that carried no trace of Wall Street's poison. It had been 3 months since I saw them in Manhattan. 3 months since I left that envelope on the cafe table. I had half expected some last desperate attempt, calls, letters, maybe even a private investigator. But there was nothing. Just silence. Perhaps they had finally understood. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in strokes of gold and purple, Anna joined me on the porch. Max was inside, practicing scales on the piano we'd bought him for his birthday. She leaned against me. "Do you ever miss them?" Her question hung in the air, heavier than it seemed. I thought of Karen's laughter in the early years, when we were young and building a life together. I thought of Daniel as a boy, running across the lawn with a football tucked under his arm. I thought of Sophie showing me her first sketches, her eyes bright with dreams. "Yes," I admitted quietly. "But I don't miss who they became." Anna kissed my cheek. "That's the difference, isn't it? Missing who they were, not who they chose to be." The final blow came 1 week later, not by my hand but by fate itself. Charles called, his voice grave. "Ed, you should know, Karen's filed for bankruptcy. Daniel's house is gone. Sophie is working shifts at a department store in Queens." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Charles hesitated. "They're not surviving well. And they keep asking if you'll reconsider." "Do you think I should?" I asked. He was silent for a moment. "You owe them nothing. But closure, that's for you, not them." That night, I couldn't sleep. I went down to my study, the quiet hum of the desk lamp filling the silence. I took out a sheet of paper and began to write. "Dear Karen, Daniel, and Sophie, 5 years ago, you showed me what I meant to you. Not love. Not loyalty. Just money. That was the day my family died. Since then, I've learned that real family isn't about blood. It's about choice. I chose to build a new life, and I did. A life of love, respect, and laughter. A life you will never be part of again. You thought you had broken me. But betrayal does not destroy, it reveals. It showed me who you are. And it showed me who I could be without you. This is my final letter. There will be no rescue, no forgiveness, no second chance. You discarded me. Now live with that choice. Edward Lawson." I sealed the envelope, stamped it, and set it aside. But in the morning, I didn't send it. I burned it in the fireplace instead. Watching the flames consume the words, I realized something profound. They didn't deserve even this final response. My life was no longer theirs to intrude upon. The real revenge wasn't in telling them. It was in living so well that their absence meant nothing. 2 years passed. Max turned 10. He won a regional chess tournament, his grin wide as he clutched the little gold trophy. Anna's winery expanded. Our bottles found their way onto restaurant menus as far as Boston. I traveled only for pleasure now. Paris with Anna, the Grand Canyon with Max, Tuscany to study winemaking with local masters. Sometimes, when the nights were long and still, I thought about them. Not with anger anymore, not even with satisfaction. Just a faint, distant ache, like the memory of a scar. I never saw them again. But through whispers, through Charles, through the occasional article, I knew enough. Karen lived alone, quieter now, the sharpness dulled by hardship. Daniel worked an ordinary accounting job, stripped of ambition. Sophie taught art classes at a community center, finally steady but far from the glamorous dream she once pursued. They survived. That was all. One autumn evening, as Anna and I walked the vineyard under a harvest moon, Max ran ahead of us, his laughter echoing in the night. Anna slipped her hand into mine. "You've built something beautiful," she said softly. I looked at her, then at Max, then at the life around me, the rows of vines, the lights of the house glowing warmly in the distance. "Yes," I said. "And no one can take it from me. Revenge is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is indifference. And sometimes it is standing on a hill in Vermont with the people who chose you, knowing the ones who betrayed you will never touch this happiness. That was my victory. That was my justice. And that was the end of Edward Lawson's old life. The man they betrayed was gone. The man who replaced him was finally free. This was just one of many stories where revenge takes an unexpected turn. Hit subscribe if you want more endings you'll never see coming. Drop a comment. What would you have done in their shoes?